Hello and welcome everyone to this week's episode of the Framework Podcast. I'm one of your two co-hosts, Jamie. I'm joined by my other co-host, Anna. And today we have somebody who I've gotten the pleasure to work with a good bit over the last, I guess not full year, half a year. It's been really enjoyable, and decided to bring Bonnie Treichel on the show. Even though you didn't announce yourself as you're not going to as CEO, I still like that, but Chief Solutions Officer and Founder. And yeah, excited to have you on the show today, Bonnie.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
For those of you that, for those people out there that don't know you, can you give us the 30 seconds of who you are and what you do? We'll dive into your story a little bit more after.
Great. Well, again, my name is Bonnie Treichel, and I own a company called Endeavor. And my main purpose is working on the 401k and 403b side of the house to try to help be the advisor to advisors in getting them ready to really start and run compliant retirement plan programs.
All right, so they have to be compliant. We can't have non-compliant retirement programs. Those are the best ones. So, you know.
That's the whole goal. We need to keep them compliant to make sure that participants get what they're entitled to.
Yeah, ERISA is a really great law. I'm a big fan of ERISA. We might talk about it later on. But one of the kickoffs to the show is we always like to ask people about food. And so I'd love for you to kind of, what's the favorite food item you have, or favorite thing about food that immediately comes to mind?
Great question. I love to eat healthy food, but overall, my favorite foods are desserts. So I really like all kinds of desserts. So cookies, cakes, any dessert, I like it.
What's your
Cupcakes and
favorite one
bourbon,
right
right?
now? Is it cupcakes
You
and
know,
bourbon?
Jamie, I don't know if you can say that on the show, but favorite, let's see. Anything lemon right now. I've been on a lemon kick. So, like lemon bars, lemon cookies. I really like lemon right now.
Lemon is always delicious. I'm in a current obsession with carrot cake right now. So
Oh,
like just eating lots of carrot cake that I probably shouldn't be eating, but it's so good. Um, so Bonnie, we always also like to ask, what was your first money memory?
uh, good question. I don't know if this is my first money memory, but an early money memory relates to when I was younger. One of my first jobs is probably the time that I felt like I had the most disposable income in my life. For anyone who's ever waited tables or been a bartender, um, I waited tables at this local restaurant, and it was interesting because you learn a lot of skills if you've ever waited tables, right? So you learn customer service, you learn how to do a lot of multitasking, you learn how to count change. But at the same time, you also feel like you've got so much money, right? Because at the end of a shift, you're counting a lot of dollar bills oftentimes, but it's a great experience because I felt like I had so much money at that point. I remember there was dollar taco night and also all you can eat pancakes Saturday morning. And those were some of my favorite shifts. They were also pretty terrible because on pancake morning, you got like really sticky, right? Because you can imagine people are paying you cash and then your tips are like covered in syrup, which is disgusting. But it really was a great experience because I learned a lot and then I was able to save a lot of that money. And I, I saved it my first summer of law school when I was clerking. That really put me through that period. Again, if anyone's ever clerked, you oftentimes, if you're clerking for a judge, you're not getting paid like that first summer. And so that helped pay for living in LA when I wasn't making any money. And I was basically paying to go to work to pay for parking. So that's probably one of my first money memories is waiting tables all through high school and then college.
That actually sounds like a terrible experience. So, like, everything's covered in syrup and the money is sticky.
But
it,
it was fun. It was fun. I did it. My closest group of girlfriends in high school all worked at the same local restaurant, so it was actually pretty fun.
I mean, if it was fun, would you do it now?
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves.
It's gonna get too crazy.
So, Also, a very important financial Twitter debate is pancakes versus waffles. So, are you a pancake or waffle person?
Well, this might be indicative of how fun it actually was. I wouldn't probably eat either now because I won't eat syrup now. I would probably just go for like, an egg white omelet with some veggies.
Well, waffles, like in Belgium, usually don't come with syrup, I don't think, right? Like old Belgian waffles were not a big syrup endeavor. Ah,
Learn something new.
Good job
yeah,
throwing that in.
that was clever.
It's like,
Well, I remember getting when I went to Belgium and I got waffles. They're not the exactly same as they are here, so they're different. And but yeah, like I mean, I think they put butter and whipped cream and apples. I think I remember apples on them, right? They put more like fruit-based toppings, not syrup. So yeah, for what it's worth, that's what I'm going with. I am definitely more of a waffle person. I like waffles better, but I am not a big dessert person. I typically would rather eat like another cheeseburger than dessert. However, there are a couple. Like I like panna cotta a lot. I like yeah, panna cotta is the one. I like bread pudding sometimes, and I do like carrot cake. And going back to the carrot cake point, there was I saw a chocolate bar that was carrot cake chocolate bar. I did not buy it, but that looked really intriguing.
I mean, carrot cake covers all your bases. You have,
Yeah.
your nuts, your healthy fats, your dairy, you have your fruits, your vegetables, raisins, your fruits. It's really a health food.
Solid health. So Bonnie, you besides working at a health food restaurant for a very long time, when you saved up that money and clerking, I remember same thing. I clerked in the federal court that summer when I wasn't paid and paying for parking. Right, like you were literally paying to work. I drove almost an hour, and you pay to park and all those things. But did you have a first like purchase that you made with your own money that stuck out?
I think so. So my parents, this was really smart of them. So my parents made us, we had to purchase our first car from, from my parents. So it was an older car. So I had a red Ford Escort, really like fancy, cool car. But I had to purchase that from my parents. So I think it was only like $2,000 and it had a lot of miles on it. But they didn't just give it, they didn't just give it to me. I had to buy it from them. And so it really taught me about, saving my money and then buying it from them. And so it's really good practice to have to save for something and then, get excited about when I purchased it from them. And so that was probably my first big purchase.
And gave you some skin in the game too to have put your own money toward it to take better care of it than had they probably just given it to you, huh?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So Bonnie, talk to us about kind of what you wanted to be when you were growing up and how you got to where you are now, founding your own company.
Yeah, great question. I would not have thought that I was going to have anything to do with retirement plans, and I definitely didn't know what ERISA was. And most people that I talk to in retirement plans don't know anything about retirement plans when they're in high school or even college, probably. So when I was an undergrad, I was poli-sci major and business minor, and I thought I was going to be a politician. And so then I realized, what it would cost to live in Washington, D.C., and realized that that mathematically probably wasn't going to make a lot of sense. My parents weren't going to pay for my life after college. And so I had the opportunity between my junior and senior year of college to get to go and do an internship in California and go work at a law firm. And I, at the same time, went ahead and took the LSAT. And so I decided that law school was going to be a better opportunity than going to work on the Hill after college. So went to law school and started after law school, I worked at a securities defense firm, decided litigation was not the route for me. But that was a great segue with financial services into the ERISA space. So I spent several years as an ERISA attorney and then also spent time as an advisor. So now I'm able to put together my legal background and my background as an advisor and now be an advisor to advisors. So it's really the intersection of legal and compliance with the practical that I think a lot of advisors really need, that practical intersected with the legal side of things, because lawyers have a lot of really great advice, but sometimes we miss the mark on the practical application. And so that somewhat non-traditional background gives me that opportunity to help advisors.
You've also gotten the ability to actually like work on plans and kind of as an advisor too. And do you think that's added to that practicality? We should come up with a term. So in the academic world, it just reminded me of this, our old CEO at American College when he came in, and he called us pracademics because he wanted us to sit between the practical side and the academic side. Academics fall into a similar category as attorneys a lot in the ivory tower notion. We do research, but none of it's actually practicable or usable with anybody. So I'll think about that while you answer this and come up with a legal one. But
you're exactly right. So I had a lot of knowledge of ERISA when I was an attorney, but the actual practical, when I was working as an advisor, I had the chance to work with plans from startup plans to a few billion-dollar plans. And that actual going to committee meetings, presenting at committee meetings quarter upon quarter, it really helped me to see what is it that plan sponsors need, what is it that participants need. Even right now, there's all kinds of great concepts out there, but some of it is just really getting plan sponsors through, and when we say plan sponsors, employers through just like the nuts and bolts of day to day. And it, like, having that knowledge as an advisor really helps me to take a step back and think about what is it that this employer or participant might really be facing or they might really need. And if you only have that legal knowledge, you can't really relate. You can, but it takes a much greater step to really relate to what a plan or a participant might really need to dig in and understand. And so that's been really helpful for me to be much more practical in my approach, as opposed to just knowing the nuts and bolts of ERISA and the code sections and how they intersect.
what do you think is the biggest kind of misconception out there that you see the wealth management advisor world have in kind of the 401k space today? Is there something that immediately pops into mind that you feel like you're constantly running against? Or, yeah, I'd love to hear that answer. And I think we'll go with a practical. That's a practical. It's a practical attorney, right? Or practical lawyer. Yeah, there we go.
Practiwar. I like that. I'm going to start using that. Practiwar. So I think you ask about the misconceptions from wealth to the retirement side. I think there's misconceptions going both directions, but we could start with wealth to retirement. I think, candidly, the biggest thing I run into is wealth management advisors who think, and it makes sense, but they think, well, I'm already working with this individual or this CFO, the CFO, and they're working with them on the individual account. And when the CFO says, oh yeah, I work at this company and we have like a $10 million plan. Can you just help us out on that? And so it's, oh yeah, I can help you out on that. Sure. $10 million plan. That's no big deal. But maybe that wealth management advisor has no knowledge of ERISA or no knowledge of how plans work. And so they just take it on. And I think problem number one is they might use a wealth management agreement for an ERISA plan. I see that quite a bit. And so with the regulations, for example, 408b2, without getting too far into the weeds, you can't use the same agreement for wealth management as ERISA because it doesn't have all the requisite disclosures that you need in it. So I think that's one thing you run into. Second is just basic servicing and service model. they're not the same. The investments aren't typically the same. The requirements aren't the same. So I think you see that quite a bit. It's wealth management advisors don't want to lose out on an opportunity. And so they say yes, which makes perfect sense. I think they want to keep that relationship. But unfortunately, they sometimes lack the knowledge. And one really good opportunity for a wealth management advisor is to keep the relationship, but partner with someone. There's awesome opportunities to go partner with someone. But I always warn, if you don't have the knowledge and you don't go partner with someone, you're going to be way worse off than if you just didn't take it entirely. So don't ever do something that you don't know how to do. Make sure you partner with someone, or go get requisite help to do that transaction or relationship, and you'll be much better off. So I think that's the biggest thing I run into is oh yeah, this is just the same, I can still do it, when really there's plenty of resources to help. You just need to go find them.
Speaking of that, Bonnie, finding those resources and gaining that knowledge, what's your advice to people or to advisors to kind of vet those potential partners and make the right decision when they're picking somebody?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's different ways you can have those relationships. So there's, one way you can do it is that you can keep the contract direct yourself. So if you're a wealth management advisor, you can still contract directly with that relationship. And then you can just have third parties that you make sure are supporting that client as well. So for example, in the retirement plan space, that would be making sure you have a really strong third party administrator and a really strong record keeper and a really strong auditor. So if you have this network of partners that can also support that client, then you can really you could be the quarterback as the advisor, but you could have this really great network around you that ensures that nothing falls through the cracks. There's other ways to do that too. So there's, I think, more and more resources popping up where, so for example, I partner with advisors and I basically back office some of their resources that they need, but I make sure they're still the star of the show and they still get to do all of the investments. So I can support them in a non-fiduciary capacity, but they still get to be the person who holds that relationship. I think there's other really nice ways. So different relationships, whereas, for example, at Carson Group, I know there's a specialist model. And so that can be a great way where someone can be the fiduciary. And then, for example, a wealth management advisor could be more in that non-fiduciary and work with participants. So there's tons of different ways in the industry that this can be set up. It's just finding the best fit for that wealth management advisor.
Let's I want to do some fun stuff here today. So are you an IRA or IRA person?
I'm an IRA person.
Yeah.
What are you?
So I say IRA now, but I was an IRA, and interestingly enough, it was right. It's named after somebody named Ira, so like it's actually the correct pronunciation of it is IRA, not IRA, which like is we had had
are
somebody
you just
on
saying
here.
you're smarter?
No,
saying basically you're smarter.
I asked this before of a guest, and she enlightened us that that's the correct terminology because she was part of the drafting of it. So it's not up for debate. We've had this definitively answered, so that's a good one. I also want to know, when you look out at the Secure Act. So now we're really in the first distribution year, right? 2022. Yeah, right. So. Is that right? I might have messed it up. But yeah, we had the year after death and then following year, and we got waived, whatever. But we're kind of a year into that. We finally got some proposed regs. What's something around the Secure Act that you were happy to see passed? And what's one thing that you did not like about the Secure Act?
Oh, good question. So I think one of the things that I was happy to see is are the provisions. Well, this might be both the pro and the con. So the provisions around lifetime income, for example. So we know that we have multiple provisions, three main provisions around lifetime income. I think the pro of the provisions around lifetime income are that we know, like when I describe Secure, I talk about that there were kind of two big issues that Secure, from my perspective, was really trying to solve. One was that we knew that we had not enough people, we had not enough people with coverage, right? So we were trying to solve the coverage gap. And then the second issue was the lifetime income issue, which is we had people who were going to outlive their bucket of money. And so we had the three provisions in Secure to address that. So when we think about it, we know the pro is that we were addressing this issue of people outliving their bucket of money. And so I think that was a real benefit to me, and I was really happy about that. I think the con is on these disclosures for participant statements. It's not necessarily the way it was passed or the subsequent regs for how it goes on people's statements. I think what I'm seeing is the con for how it's going to show up on participant statements starting this summer is that participants are going to start getting something on their statement as a result of Secure Act that says, hey, here's how your bucket of money is going to show up throughout the rest of your life. I think the con for that is I think it's going to cause a lot of participant confusion, because then there's also a lot of these record keepers have these great tools and resources and calculators like on their website. And those are built on different assumptions in many cases. And then in addition to that, you have plan sponsors who've been getting these different reports from record keepers that say, your plan has a score of sunny with double suns, and your plan has, I mean, so like that's one company uses kind of the sunshine and clouds and that
Sunny
sort
with
of
a chance of double sun.
I don't know, I made that up, but it's like
that's like that actually sounds terrible, because if there are two suns, we're definitely catching on fire and burning up, right? Like, it's a very bad outcome.
So I think, the issue being
You're like, I'm going to try to go back to an actual thought after
okay.
that.
Yeah, anyways.
Anyways. So
This
not
is how you change the
suns,
story. Anyways.
maybe just one sun, but the point being, like, these record keepers have these different measures. Secure has a separate measure that it required in the subsequent regs. So how do we basically reconcile that? And I think that's the con, because I think it's going to cause participant confusion.
Okay. I'd love to, you mentioned the calculators that are out there. And this is I struggle with some of these, mostly from like my experience. I haven't done a review of all these record keepers and their calculators, but I had one at a previous job, and I remember going into that calculator. It's a fairly large size firm too, so it's not a small kind of one-off thing. Like, I don't know, there's probably millions of people that have this access to this calculator. And it was like the worst thing that I've ever experienced in my sense of like projections out into retirement. Like, I used to look at this thing and be like, wow, like as somebody who teaches like retirement income planning, and I look at this, it was like, this thing's like nonsense, right? And I do worry about those. And when you talk about that, do you think that do you think that the market can kind of regulate? This is, I guess, taking a little. Do you think the market can regulate itself on that? And is there an opportunity to like deliver something that's more consistent? Because as you brought up, the differences between these, qualified plan education calculators, I mean, they're all over the place on how they're demonstrating, what they're talking about. And I think you're right. Like the projections in there, it's the garbage in, garbage out, like bad inputs and the assumptions underneath of it, create just, you're looking at that being like, this is totally misleading to somebody and probably encouraging them not to save enough, was my opinion of looking at that calculator. Like, it was way too rosy of a lifetime income projection. That was like, I mean, that might be like an average outcome, fair enough, but I think it's encouraging a lot of people to undersave, actually, not encouraging good behavior. There was a lot packed in there, but thoughts on that?
Well, So I think one of the things that I heard you say is there an opportunity? And I think the opportunity is for example, a wealth management advisor or a plan advisor who provides some participant level services. And I think those participant level services can be one to many or one on one. But I think there's an opportunity for the advisor to bridge some of those gaps because I think what I overwhelmingly heard you say is those calculators aren't always accurate. Those projections aren't always accurate. So there's that opportunity to educate, to bridge that gap where we do have lots of opportunity to make sure people really understand, you know, what what it is they actually need and not just in some mass uh, projection that works from a regulatory standpoint for everyone because we have lots of different scenarios we're trying to solve for.
So Bonnie, earlier you brought up when you were talking about the Secure Act, things that might cause participant confusion. So also today, a separate but related, Danica Waddell posted about she had a client who had like 7 different target date funds. And so the question is, how can we, number one, how can you help plan administrators avoid that participant confusion and avoid misusing like the simplified version of signing up for these funds?
Great question. I think if I understand, so we had someone who put money in, for example, like a little in the 2015, a little in the 2020, a little in the 2025, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think they had like $5,000 across like 7 different targets, which we know happens, right? The more funds that you
Not
give somebody, the more they diversify across them. Uh, yeah.
and not uncommon with the target date fund. So again, Jamie, one of the things you said about it wasn't helpful being an advisor. I think as an attorney, I would have never guessed someone would do that because I would have thought, oh, this is self-explanatory. This is a target date fund. We don't know how to use that. But when I was an advisor, one of the things I would start having record keepers do once a year is produce a report to the plan sponsor so that we could see that type of information. So just a basic, how are the target date funds being used? And is a participant across more than one target date fund, right? That's a basic, is this being used as intended? And inevitably you generally see it wasn't being used as intended. And so that's where then most record keepers can do a quick targeted outreach to any participant who's not using it as intended. So I think that's where, again, if we think about retirement plans, I'm always an advocate about we don't need to create really big, fancy, complicated plans. We can keep them pretty simple, but using some basic reports and targeted communications to reach out to those participants and let them know the intended use of a target date fund. They might have missed that in the very first set of enrollment materials, right? If you think about when you're typically getting enrolled in that target date fund, it's during a transition. It's during a transition when you're being told you're losing your beneficiary that's set up on file. You've got to choose a new amount to defer. Your money's all going to be in blackout for a month, maybe sometimes. So there's so much information. Most people aren't paying attention, and it might be at the same time as other things going on at the company, maybe at the same time as an M&A, issue coming up with your company. So it's a good way to just take a step back and do some sort of targeted communication. And I think it not only applies with target date funds, there's many other things where through some basic reporting, you can pull a report, see what the issue is, and do some pretty simple targeted communications that can make an impact over time. That comes up oftentimes with beneficiaries too. You'll find a lot of people don't have a beneficiary on file, and they might have intended to. And you can see that you can really make progress with some targeted outreach and communication.
I think when I look at the qualified plan space today, one of the big challenges when you kind of get into the policy discussions is that, kind of technically anybody could have access to a plan if they really wanted it, right? To some degree, what exactly that plan looks like. But we still know that people in small employers, and that's a big number, right? Small employers, I think from the government's like under 500 person companies, right? Small Business Association. And then you get down to like the under 100, and you actually have a lot of people that don't have access to a workplace provided qualified plan once you get down there. What is missing? And I guess, like, can that be solved from today's system? I think that's a constant conversation, because we get conversations about, should we have state-run plans? Should we have things like the Myra, which popped up at one point from the federal level, right? Then that got scrapped pretty quickly. But we do have an issue. Like, we don't have enough people saving for retirement, and plans are available but not actually getting to people. So in your view, what is that gap? Can advisors fill it, or do we need policy changes?
Yeah, great question. So there's 60 million Americans without access to a workplace retirement plan. And I think when we were talking about Secure, that was the other big goal of Secure. And so I think there's really a multi-prong approach. One is the state-run system. And some states have been very effective at starting to close that gap. But again, those are IRAs, and so they don't allow for quite as much saving, but they are a step in the right direction. But I think the other component of that is through my belief is through wealth management advisors, not necessarily through what you typically have thought of as traditional plan advisors, because I think traditionally we looked at plan specialists and then having wealth management advisors, and those being two separate camps for the most part. But I think the way to close the gap is more through having what I would call a traditional wealth management advisor, having access to really simplified plans. And that could be either through a PEP or a MEP. And when we use these terms and acronyms, really what we're talking about is more than one employer in essentially one plan. And that could be the same service providers providing services and essentially the same plan for, we'll say for simplicity's sake, to multiple employers. And that makes it a lot easier, because if we think about wealth management advisors looking for a simplified solution to make a plan available to these small employers, it just makes it a lot easier to communicate to these employers, to have generally a lower cost option. It's not necessarily that you're selling on the cost option though, but when we think about retirement plans, they're generally sold, not bought. And so I'll say that again, they're sold, not bought. So you don't have employers out running around saying like, I want to buy one. It's because someone comes and sells it to them. And so if we have wealth management advisors with the tools in their toolkit to go out and sell these small plans, because they can easily put them into either a PEP, a MEP, or it might be a small plan solution, which a small plan solution in my mind, that's a simplified, it could be single employer plan, but it's easy and simple. We're not saying there's all kinds of complicated provisions, but very streamlined. And then also taking into account the tax breaks of starting that plan. So again, we don't have to go into that too deep, but Secure Act, and then if there's another, subsequent Secure 2.0 seeks to have additional tax breaks for just simply starting a retirement plan. And so that makes it very appealing. And so I think the idea is that these wealth management advisors can say, hey, I've already got the relationship with this individual. I have this other kind of tool in my toolkit to also sell them and bring this opportunity for their business and help them grow their business with this 401k option as well.
You mentioned Secure Act 2.0. I think that, that represents an opportunity for advisors, but not in the way that a lot of people look at it. And it's something that I saw some advisors have success with at the, kind of the tailwind of the original Secure Act, although that was short-lived because we got such a, hey, this passed and then the whole world shut down. But in a short period of time, people were able to, and I brought this up to people, like go to, as you said, the selling opportunities, right, where you're going to take this out to the world and educate, and it gives you a reason to engage people because something has changed. And right, there were small plan tax credits that were built into that were higher than the previous small employer credits for starting a plan. And it's likely that Secure Act 2.0, if it passes some point in this year, that it would have some small plan improvements or tax credits they've been talking about in there too for setting up a plan. And, to me, that gives people such an opportunity to bring up this conversation because you can immediately say, like, why am I here? Well, because the law changed and there's now, right, it's cheaper than it was before to talk about this. And a lot of advisors go immediately to like the planning stuff, not actually to that sales capacity in the 401k side, which I think is very interesting because if this was the flip side, it was the wealth management side and their fees were coming down, they would know how to go sell that everywhere. But there does seem to be a gap between those two skill sets here when it comes to the qualified plan world and the like wealth management client side.
I think it's just because a lot of times it hasn't been made easy, right? Plans have been made complicated. And historically, why I think that's the case is that historically it's been about we let service providers drive that discussion. And so it's been driven by, but you could add this auto enroll feature, you could add this, you know, this bell, this whistle, add this plan provision and that one. And so you're always adding things, which if you're a wealth management advisor, this isn't the space you play in. It keeps getting more complicated. So why would you want to kind of go do that? But if we're making it just more streamlined, again, I call it a small plan solution. Obviously, that's not good for marketing, but if you have a good name to it and you streamline it and you're selling on the tax incentives, that is something that's more appealing because Jamie, to your point, it gives you something to go out and talk about.
It's a Main Street solution, not a Wall Street solution. There's your marketing, right? People like that. So
that's good.
So Anna and I just did an episode right before this, and we were talking about the power of education as it comes to kind of financial literacy and raising people up and giving people opportunities. And Anna, I'm actually throwing you over a question because I've been talking for a while. And then I want Bonnie's response to this too, which is wellness programs, right? You go back to the 90s and wellness programs were going to be the great revolution of the 401k and employer plan side. And not to say that they've been a massive failure, but probably pretty close to a massive failure across the board. And Anna, I guess my question is, so you've been at a couple different companies. Do you remember anything super positive about a wellness program or education side of any of your retirement plans that you've been in? Like, have you used any of them?
Yeah, we had the only thing that I can recall that I thought was different from the other companies I've been at. I've only been at three other than Carson. But we had like one-on-one guidance from some of the folks from the provider side of it. So that it wasn't, I mean, it wasn't super helpful though. It was kind of just explaining the way things work to us. But that was the first time I remember like actually getting an explanation on what the things were. Like I started my career as a reporter and I remember going to my first meeting to enroll in the 401k. I had no idea. I was like, I don't know what to do. I was just checking boxes. Like I was, ignorant 22-year-old. So, but at the FPA, that was one of the things that when I first started, I remember standing out.
I think your experience is very that in general you're not getting much success out of a wellness program unless it is this one-on-one type of experience. And so one of the things that I think is interesting on the plan side is that Jamie, you hit it spot on. Wellness in general has been a massive failure from my perspective. Some of my industry counterparts would probably disagree with me. But my perspective is, and I might not get asked to do things for saying that on a podcast, but I think in general, wellness has been pretty much a failure. And so I think we struggle to really demonstrate from a quantitative perspective how wellness has really helped to move the needle. That being said, I think when you do RFPs and things like that, if you're on the advisor side or even a plan sponsor to an advisor, we always ask, what's the wellness program? Everyone's got to have it, yet we don't actually look to see if it's actually working. One of the interesting things is that now it's like, okay, wellness isn't working, so we've got to have this individualized experience. So now we've got advisor managed accounts, and so we're just switching to something that's individualized, but it's through a managed account solution. And so I think, Anna, what I hear you saying is it's not that you got thrown into a managed account. That is an actual one-on-one experience. And so I do think the biggest thing that the industry is trying to fix is how can we come up with an affordable resource that does create a one-on-one experience. From my perspective, it's how can we minimize the time spent at the plan level so that it's a really easy compliant solution for the plan sponsor so that advisors and record keepers have more time to devote to those individual experiences.
I've got another question, which is kind of straddles the line of the, I guess, legal and practical side, which is, ERISA came in at a very important time where people were starting to lose faith in some of the retirement systems because companies were promising retirement benefits, and then the companies would go out of business and they weren't pre-funded, and there were no rules to require pre-funding, and it was unsure at the time, right, whether a company's promise for a future benefit, right, was actually a legally enforceable promise. And so that seems today, I remember learning that and being like, oh, well, obviously that's the case. And you go back to the 70s and that wasn't the case, right? I mean, it's a relatively new construct. But we've also since then had a lot of litigation and probably a growing amount of litigation around ERISA plans. And this then brings to advisors, and I know that you hear this, oh, that's too much liability. There's too many lawsuits now, right? It's all about removing fees and just getting everything to as low cost as possible and nothing about value, and it's too high liability. And so I guess the question is like, where's the balance between the two? And I guess, do you believe in that notion that we do have too many lawsuits and liability and concerns there? Like, has the pendulum swung too far now since ERISA was passed in the 1970s?
So on the litigation front, it's interesting. If you were to kind of look at a chart from, we saw the Schlichter firm out of St. Louis, the mid 2000s started filing cases in the ERISA space. And they were only the mega plans, right? So unless you were just a mega plan, you didn't have to pay attention. And then it started picking up, and there was a little dip around 2011, 2012, and then it really started picking up again. And you would have thought that during the pandemic that there would have been really just a lack of cases. And during 2020, there were more cases filed than ever in ERISA litigation. You also saw, and I'm going to take a little bit of a step back, but during 2016, we saw the first really grouping of 403B cases, which have really influenced even on the 401k side because of some of the novel issues that were filed as well, and had great success. So ERISA litigation has not slowed down at all. It's only rapidly increased, particularly from 2016 and then especially 2020 and on. And we're seeing it come down market, although the coming down market, I would say, unless you're a $500 million plan, it comes down market occasionally, but not really beyond that. So I think you don't have to be concerned like, I'm a $200 million plan. I can't have a plan because it's just too risky. I would disagree with that statement. I still think it's really mostly large plans that are getting sued because mathematically, it just doesn't make sense otherwise from the plaintiff attorney's perspective. That being said, the other thing with ERISA litigation is that you have to think about it's about process. And so there's not many cases that are just outcome based, they're process based. And so ERISA allows you to hire service providers to help you create that process. So, and maybe that just makes it sound too simple, but you're allowed to hire advisors, consultants, other experts to create the process you need that keep you safe from, you can't be safe from a lawsuit being filed, but you can absolutely have a great defense if one is filed. So I think from my perspective, I don't think it's that big of a deal. There are going to be cases, but I think you're going to be well protected against it. The one issue that I think is becoming a little bit scarier for plan sponsors is the guidance around cybersecurity and some of the cases around cybersecurity, because those are, single participant making a claim because $300,000 was stolen from their account sort of thing. But those aren't big class action suits.
But Bonnie, tell us a little bit more about that aspect of cybersecurity and what people can kind of do to address that potential risk.
Yeah, another great point to make is that the Department of Labor did come out with guidance in April of 2021, and it gives really a great roadmap for plan sponsors, or rather employers, as well as for the service providers that they're hiring. So I think you have a really good roadmap to be able to follow if you are being proactive in hiring service providers and if you're a plan sponsor dealing with cybersecurity issues. So yes, I think it's a scary issue if you have a plan, but it's not different from other aspects of your business. I think everyone's got to take proactive steps for cybersecurity, whether it's related to your plan or any area of your business. And so again, as long as you're documenting it, taking the right steps when hiring service providers, such as your third-party administrator or your record keeper, then you'll have a solid foundation to take next steps.
Bonnie, it brings me to kind of another interesting point, and I don't know how much you've looked at this. How much due diligence do you think that kind of solo or small advisors are missing on a lot of these things? Because I've worked with a lot, and I'll be kind of honest, like a lot of times I look at this and I say, a lot of these due diligence on technology vendors, small firms, and not even just solo firms, but small firms do not have the capacity to do. And they essentially go, oh, well, somebody else uses them, so it's totally fine. Interestingly enough, right, that probably doesn't meet any type of due diligence, even though they might be the household name, they might be the household brand, but you went back to the fact if something occurs, it'll be more about the process that you took to vet them and not actually their security systems, which is a little bit of a surprise to people. And this came to mind because I know somebody who's going through an audit and they're getting dinged on one of these things right now. And they're like, but that's what everybody uses. And they're like, yeah, but you did no vetting. Like, it does not work in the world to say, well, everybody else I know uses them, so obviously they're fine. Because the rules, especially SEC and DOL, are going to go back to what would a prudent person do, and just listening to what everybody else around you does is not rising to that level.
That's exactly right. So again, ERISA is all about having a prudent process. And so it's the fact that you ask the question. So even if it's a really large vendor, and you're a really small RIA, and you know that all of your clients are really small, so this really large vendor is going to tell you no to everything you ask. So you think, well, I'm going to ask them for a copy of this, and they're going to say, no, we have an NDA that protects that, and we're not extending that to you. Or we want them to extend these safeguards related to cross-selling for participant data. And you know that really large vendor is going to say no. It's the fact that you ask, and you ask on behalf of each one of your clients, having those outreaches where you ask and you can document that you've asked, that's what makes the difference. And so if you just say, well, everyone else uses this really large vendor, so that must be okay, you don't know what's in everyone else's file. And maybe there were, 10 rounds of back and forth that got them to whatever answer, or maybe there is something in that contract where something's been mitigated. And so I think that is where smaller firms, it's part of the issue that's causing so many firms to sell or associate with larger firms, so that they have the power to have the resources to negotiate with large vendors, not just on, a tech stack, but on these types of issues, because smaller firms can't keep up quite as well, or it just takes a lot more hours in the day to do so.
Anna, do you want to kind of give our follow-up question here at the end, even though it's I feel like we have a somewhat of a gauge of what Bonnie might care about here.
Yeah. So, Bonnie, we always like to end with a hopeful note and ask people what they hope their impact or legacy will be.
You might already know what mine is, but you know, I started my company in hopes of trying to make access to assistance related to retirement plans more affordable for advisors and their plan sponsor clients. So the goal is to help reach all of the Americans who don't have access to a retirement plan today. And if I can do that by helping more advisors to help their plan sponsor clients, that's really the goal of what I'm trying to do.
And Bonnie, where's the best places for people to find you and your company Endeavor?
Um, I can be reached. My website is endeavor-retirement.com. I can be reached at Bonnie at endeavor-retirement.com or on LinkedIn or on Twitter.
And what's your Twitter handle? Do you know off the top of your head? You're like,
I,
oh man.
I was like, oh, I think it's B Treichel ESQ. Yeah, I think it's B Treichel ESQ. I said that with
Uh,
not very much confidence.
yeah, you did. So it is B Tricle ESQ. I found it, so that's good. Helping retirement plan advisors save time, manage risk, and secure new business. Right? That's your tagline. So it's a good one that you have on there. So, well, Anna and Bonnie, this was fun. Thanks for joining us here and talking a little bit 401k. I know we probably got more into the weeds in some of our episodes, but I figured that was going to happen here today when you put both of us on the show. And thank you, everybody else, for listening to this week's episode of the Framework Podcast.